And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Anslone Show, and I am very excited for what I have for you guys today. I think this is a very, very needed conversation in the libertarian movement, and many libertarians, I think, would be nervous or afraid to write a piece as brave as Tom did. So, everybody, the guest today is Thomas Edlum. He is the Will Grigg Fellow over at the Libertarian Institute. And the topic today really is socialism and billionaires and how libertarians should look at these two groups and who's the bigger threat. Also, where libertarians go wrong on this issue. Doge's failure, talk a little bit about that. And how all this has impacted the right in the shift to a right in America and now who has power and influence. So, Tom, I want to jump right into it with this recent article that you wrote for the Libertarian Institute titled Billionaires, Not Socialists, Are the Biggest Threat to the Free Market. Now, I think just the plumb line libertarian take that most people would have would be no, billionaires represent big business and capitalism and they're good, and government represents theft and control of power, and we need to make government as small as possible so we can have as many billionaires as possible. And you're saying not so much, so kind of explain yourself.
Sure. I mean, my take is not the same as Zoran Mandami, where he basically says, "Oh, just billionaires are bad because they make profits." My argument was basically this: that we don't have any socialism. Socialism is not a threat. I mean, we have, if you look at actual, real, dyed-in-the-wool socialism, which is government ownership of the means of production. We don't have any in the United States or across the West. I mean, like you could argue, Amtrak, the passenger train, is kind of is social. Well, it is socialist, but that's about it. And Mandami he was talking about creating in the city of New York a grocery store. I don't think creating a grocery store that's going to have rats and fleas and flies all over the place is really going to be a threat nationally. But if you look at where the free market goes wrong, I mean, not the market, but where the government goes wrong and it goes against the free market, it's in subsidizing billionaires. If you look at Elon Musk, he's had $36 billion in federal and state subsidies over the years, according to the Washington Post, and that was 2 years ago. That doesn't count a lot of his more recent contracts with his rocket company. You look at Larry Ellison. He's in high tech. There's all of high tech pretty much is in bed with the CIA, the NSA. They require huge contracts just to get going. So almost, if you look at the top 6 billionaires, all of them have federal contracts in the 9-figure or greater level. Now, a lot of libertarians would say, well, but they're providing a service. And, I guess they're providing, Elon Musk is providing a service when he puts a spy satellite up for the U.S. military or for the NSA. But is that really something that we want? And what we see is the entire economy is geared around benefiting billionaires and not regular people. Yeah, so that's basically the pitch.
That's that's such an important insight in 2025. And one of the main criticisms I've had of the libertarian movement, and I'm somebody who read a lot of Ayn Rand. I actually enjoy her books, her philosophy. I understand what she's saying, but she, I think, created a real fetish among libertarians for business. And in a sense, that's good, right? Like there should be good, honest business. And I'm sure it's possible that somebody in this country can still go out without becoming a government welfare queen and make millions or maybe even $1 billion. But the vast majority of the people who have accumulated a massive amount of wealth in this country in all sectors, right? We're not just talking, I know you mentioned tech and we'll get into that more later, but in all sectors, it is really the government handouts and other things that kind of inhibit competition that these companies set up that has allowed them to amass so much wealth. It's really, they are, in a sense, socialists, right? They are, I guess, not in that they want the socialist ideology, but they are willing to take handouts from the government.
Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, they see, when the Republicans campaign against socialism, it's kind of a phantom campaign, right? Because there isn't any real campaign to nationalize the steel industry or the automobile industry or any of those things. I mean, even Bernie Sanders has basically given up on that, right? But if you look at uh, who runs the government and who's writing the checks, the campaign checks, the billionaires are writing checks for both sides. If you look at Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, they both got hundreds of millions, actually, I think more than $1 billion from billionaires. I mean, Donald Trump he got what, almost 200 million from the Sands Casino fortune heir. What's her name? I can't think. Who's
Adelson, Mariam
Yeah,
Adelson.
Miriam Adelson, and before that, Sheldon Adelson, and Kamala Harris got even more billionaire money. Well, they do what their donors ask. I mean, that's why Donald Trump, he he campaigned against war, and then when he gets elected, well, gee, he got all kinds of donations from people in who are working for Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas and all of these defense contractors and high tech contractors that benefit from wars and from military buildup that we really don't need. So there's not really a danger of socialism in the sense of nationalizing, because the billionaires who control both parties of government don't want that. And if there were actually a real proposal for nationalizing something, both parties would come out against it. So I'm not really worried about socialism. I mean, I'm opposed to it. I think it's bad, but where's the threat?
Yeah, no, that is really a fantastic point. As you said, almost no means of production in the United States are owned by the U.S. government, and that includes maybe one industry that, as a libertarian, I would never suggest any industry should be nationalized. But if there is one industry that's only client is essentially the U.S. government, it's the arms manufacturers, right? But even
Right.
that's all privately owned, and that benefits a lot of people. And as you say, if the government's going to start nationalizing things, this is one of the most influential lobbies in the United States of America. So it really is a good roadblock on the socialism, especially when we're talking about like seizing the means of production.
Right. Yeah, that's my point. And I think if we define it as, I mean, I'm not set on the term, but if we define the actual threat from these billionaires, and it's not, they're not all billionaires. I just use that as a catch-all term. But if we look at government subsidies, gatekeeping regulations, bailouts, those kind of things, if we look at that threat, well, let's label it what it really is more precisely than socialism, because a lot of people like to say, especially the Republicans, but even a lot of libertarians just like to say, well, if I don't like it, if government shouldn't be doing it, it's socialism. But technically, it's fascism. I mean, that's what Mussolini did. He put government, the corporations, literally in the government. I mean, in a more formal way than we do in the United States. He had a Grand Council of Fascism. And some of the other fascist governments, like Salazar did it as well. I don't think Franco did. But the point is, we we're following the fascism. Now, if you don't want to call it that, that's fine, because it's a term it's kind of a lightning term. Then
Right.
call it crony capitalism, call it bureaucracy. There's a number of other terms that we have that we can use, but it is technically capitalism. I mean, these guys are earning profits, and it is technically private, so it's not socialism, and I think we need to recognize that.
Yeah. So one kind of, I guess, follow up I have for you here is particularly when we look at President Donald Trump and kind of how he's handled some of these issues where, he's, I think, threatening now to weigh in on the Netflix buy of, is it Warner Brothers or HBO or something like that? He certainly has said like the government's going to buy like a big chunk of IBM, and really seems to be willing to intervene with a heavy hand in the economy more than I remember presidents in my lifetime doing so. And again, I would really hate to call Donald Trump a fascist, because over the past decade, everybody's called Donald Trump a fascist for, say, wanting to have a border policy. And so you sound completely ridiculous. But if you are looking at the actual definition of fascism, it does seem that Trump is really engaging in some of that with his economic policy.
Yeah, I mean, in the economic sense, I mean, one of the, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like the greatest analysis of fascism was done during World War II by the classical liberal uh, writer and journalist John T. Flynn, and he put this book out in 1944 called "As We Go Marching." It was very brave, and he said, "What are the essential elements of fascism?" And he put together, I think there were 8 of them, and there were, some of them were the things that you would expect. The leadership principle, where one person is in charge and everybody else is under him, and all of the trappings that you would expect of a totalitarian state. But when he got to the economic part, he talked about, they want the capitalist system, but they want it regulated, and they want to guarantee the profits to the favored corporations, and they want subsidies, and they want gatekeeping regulations, and the rest. And wow, that's what we have. And it's kind of why, and we have that because we've been fighting socialism for 25 years, 30, 30, almost 35 years after the Berlin Wall fell. Even China isn't even that socialist anymore. They've gone the same route that we have. They've pursued the fascist economic policies, or if you prefer, crony capitalism or whatever. So I think that's why we're losing, because we haven't properly identified what the problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. So to really hit home on the libertarian point today, Tom, I learned that Reason is holding a debate between Elizabeth Nolan Brown and Robbie Swabe, and from Breaking Points, Emily and Ryan Grimm. And Robbie and Elizabeth are going to be defending Big Tet, saying it does more harm than good. And certainly there's some nuance to this. And unfortunately, I had already had you scheduled on it. This is now going to take place in 2 hours. But I was wondering, what kind of case you would make here. Would you argue that, big tech has actually, in particularly with the billionaire class and all their influence, done more harm than good? We've seen things now where the CIA and NSA buy up data from Facebook and Amazon and other places. And with all that data, they're able to unmask all of us. And so they've effectively created these institutions, or helped to create these big tech institutions, and then they use those big tech institutions to pay them to get our data, and then they use that to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. And so it seems to me like it would be very hard for a libertarian to argue in favor of big tech at this point, but that's what's going to happen with these Beltway libertarians. So what's your take on this?
Wow. I mean, of course, we're able to do what we're doing because of big tech. I mean, or at least tech. But I do think the argument I would basically make is the same argument that I would make about war. That the United States has a huge military, and eventually, with this giant military, people start saying, well, we got this big military, let's use it. And the same thing happens with the CIA, NSA, and all of the surveillance that we have available. They wanted to be able to, right after 9/11, they wanted to be able to see everything. That was the goal. And they were able to do that. But seeing it wasn't enough. They wanted to control the debate afterwards. And that's why we got Alex Jones kicked off of social media, and also Nick Fuentes kicked off of everything, including banking. And then it went from the people that we didn't like to, gee, everybody's dialed down for criticizing the federal policy on COVID or masks or whatever the government wants. And it even manipulated elections with, the Hunter Biden laptop is fake. It's Russian propaganda, when in fact it wasn't. So the government was manipulating elections in the United States, almost using like a color revolution in the United States in 2020 to put Joe Biden in. And that's the problem. So that's, if I were to make the case that big tech has done more harm than good, I would start with that. But also, yeah, they're all on welfare as well, and almost all of them. There's very little non-welfare going on among big tech. I mean, because the CIA, the NSA, the Defense Department, and even just regular bureaucratic federal agencies, even the Department of Labor has to buy computers and software and all the rest of it. So, gee, now there's an incentive for Microsoft and all these companies to keep the Department of Labor running because they're big customers. They're paying customers. They pay on time.
Right.
So far.
And I could imagine a scenario here where, let's say, the CEO of Microsoft or Microsoft as a company put out like some kind of ad that President Donald Trump didn't like, or said that his tariffs were stupid and ruining America. I could very well see Donald Trump coming out and saying that the US government is no longer going to buy Microsoft products. And even if he wasn't able to follow through with that, imagine the kind of market hit that Microsoft stock would take if the president were to say something like that. Now, Tom, moving on, we had this interesting interview between Elon Musk and Katie Miller. That's the wife of Trump advisor Stephen Miller. And one of the subjects that came up was Doge, and Elon does a little bit of a retrospective on his involvement. So I want to play this short clip for you and get your thoughts.
Would you ever do Doge again?
Do you mean would I repeat history, or would I?
Two ways to think about it. One is if you could go back and start from scratch, like it's January 20th all again, would you go back and do it differently? And knowing what you know now, do you think there's ever a place to restart you, not saying others in your stead, you go back and restart doing Doge?
I mean, no, I don't think so. Would I do it? I think I probably, I don't know.
Would you do Doge again knowing what you know now?
I mean, the thing is, like, I think instead of doing Doge, I would have basically built, worked on my companies, essentially. So, and the cars, they wouldn't have been burning the cars.
You gave up a lot to do Doge.
Yeah. Like if you stop money going to going for political corruption, they will lash out big time. Mm-hmm. So they really want the money to keep flowing.
So, Tom, I think there's a couple interesting parts in this clip, but that last little bit there, I want to ask you about, where he talks about how basically, if you turn off the pipeline, then people start freaking out. So, how exactly would you address this problem as the government if every time you try to cut anything, you have a whole bunch of people in Congress and in Washington all raising massive red flags and saying that, oh, he's going to destroy the entire country because their bottom line is going to be significantly impacted by any cuts?
That's one of the more difficult things. It's something I've written about, that most of our budget, the federal budget, is on what you could call autopilot. It doesn't require a vote of Congress. It just gets spent automatically. And this includes not just Social Security and Medicare, but even things like farm subsidies. And the interesting thing, this was the first year where, before Congress met to spend a penny on the courts or the embassies abroad or foreign aid or national defense, we were already in deficit. It's the first year that's ever happened because all of that money was automatically spent. And cutting it doesn't just require Congress to do nothing. Cutting it requires an affirmative act of Congress, and that's part of the problem. Also, I mean, if we had a president who really stood up, they could actually get something done, even with Trump totally backing out on Doge, even though he promised. Doge was originally promised $2 trillion in cuts, and they got, I think, 9 billion, which is less than 1%. And the 9 billion wasn't so much cuts in spending, but redoing federal contracts that were wasting money. But if we had a president that actually stuck to his guns and cut, they could stand all of the hullabaloo, especially for something like foreign aid. I mean, foreign aid is maybe 30 billion a year, maybe a little bit more during some years. And there's no native domestic constituency for that other than Raytheon. Well, I suppose, yeah. Right. I mean, I don't really count that as a native constituency, even though technically it's American. But I think a president could get more done. We need a Congress that will stand up, and that's part of the problem. We've got one congressman and one senator, kind of, who are willing to stand up, and that's about it. So we get what we get.
So, we're almost a year into Donald Trump's, I guess, the first year of his second term. And, Doge was one of the things that at this time last year, libertarians were really excited about, right? They were like, hey, Donald Trump's not great. He's got to end the war in Ukraine. He's going to cut foreign aid. He's going to bring some U.S. troops home. There's going to be no more regime change wars. And maybe biggest of all, we got Doge. They're saying they're going to cut $2 trillion from the budget. And so, now that Doge is over, Elon's out of the administration, mostly seems to have fallen out of favor with Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on the Doge project?
Well, with regard to President Trump, I mean, he, once again, as always, he proved the Horton rule, right? Scott Horton says presidents only keep their bad promises. So this is what happened, right? He promised to limit the wars or get rid of the wars. Nope, we got that. He broke that. The bad promises, I'm going to crack down on immigration. I'm going to do all, I'm going to go after Iran. I'm going to all of the bad promises he kept and all the good ones he went out of. How do we do a Doge? I mean, we've done this over the years, and then when we do these studies, they really never amount to much. They don't. I mean, in the 80s there was the Grace Commission, or maybe it was the 90s. I think it was the 80s. Where they studied to get rid of waste and fraud. They have to cut programs. I mean, we have $2 trillion worth of deficit right now. They have to cut programs. They're not going to be able to raise taxes and balance the budget. They have to cut programs, and there's a lot that can be cut fairly easily if you have a Congress that stands up for it. But the focus has to be getting congressmen who are willing to gum up the works, like Thomas Massey, and call a spade when someone like Speaker Johnson comes in and says, "Oh well, I'm not going to allow the Patriot Act to be renewed and section, what was the section of that allows warrantless searches? I'm not going to let that be renewed." And then as soon as he gets in, 2 minutes later, he's, "Oh yeah, that's what. Just pass it. That we need someone like Thomas Massey to say, no, well, you're out. That's it." And the interesting thing is, it may not take that many congressmen, because Congress is so closely split that if you get 15 or 20 of them, that's enough to totally wreck the partisan divide. If you can get 20 Republicans and Democrats to just basically say, no, we want real reform, we want real spending, reform and cuts, you just may get it, because it's going to wreck the party control in Washington.
Yep. That is a fantastic point as how things kind of have been moving, where the more narrow the split gets in Congress, really the more power Thomas Massey has. He only has to do to one or two other Republicans, and then the Republicans either have to, agree at least to some of Massey's demands, or, they don't get whatever they wanted through. Now, next up here, I have this clip. This is Nick Fuentes breaking down and discussing his recent interview on Piers Morgan. The show was an absolute train wreck, but this is what he had to say afterwards.
Actually, I don't know. It's funny because during the interview and afterward, he seemed like he thought it went his way. But then I think he saw the comments on YouTube and on X, and then he started freaking out on Twitter and replying to everybody. And I don't think it got the reaction that he thought it would. And that's very telling. It ain't 2015 anymore, buddy. Different generation, and it's a different era. It's a new time. This is the year of the groiper, year of the frog, pal. That's the thing. A lot of these boomers, not only is there a generational divide in how we speak to each other and how we talk about these issues, but it's a different world. It's a different conversation. And the old playbook where they call you racist, they call you a misogynist, they call you an anti-Semite, and they expect that everybody is going to fall in line. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's 2025. This is a new chapter. And I'll talk about what I mean by that and why I think that is. But suffice to say, he came out of it feeling very confident, and then I think he was very surprised by some of the feedback. Well, it's a new world.
So, Tom, really wanted to ask you here is not so much about him talking about Piers Morgan, but his general observations that, look, it's a new world and 2026 is going to be the year of the groiper. And I do think he's right about that. And I think libertarians, speaking very generally, have some of the same problems that Piers Morgan does, where they are trying to communicate with this younger generation in a way that doesn't make sense to them. And for libertarians, it means that we're, completely cut out. We have this massive divide on the right now. And one of the strongest members of that divide, and one of the people really causing the split, is Thomas Massey, who is a libertarian leaning Republican. And yet it really seems to me that in this moment where libertarians should have a real time to shine, and we should have a real chance to make our case to young Americans on why the current system is failing and why our prescriptions will work better, we are losing to Nick Fuentes. And I think that is in part our fault for our messaging, particularly when it comes to economics. And so, to wrap up here, particularly geared towards young Americans, what does the libertarian messaging need to look like on economics to help explain the world today in the way that it is, but also not to just say, we need to cut welfare while deregulating business when, every young American sees business as a massive part of the problem, correctly so, in current day America. And so they immediately exclude all of our positions right away because we're not able to properly identify either the biggest or one of the biggest problems in their lives.
Yeah, I looked at, I was listening to Nick Fuentes. I just don't see the appeal. He never really said anything in that clip other than it's a new world. It's a new world. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't really mean anything. He has found a scapegoat, right? He's found the threat. They're going after the white person, and there's some truth to that there with some policies, but we libertarians, we need to focus on addressing our message to regular working people. We appeal very much to young people already on foreign policy. If you look at our position on Gaza, they young people love our foreign policy.
Right.
On economics, we need to stop doing the meme thing that I don't know. It seems like every libertarian does, which is, hey, let's look at who pays income taxes. Gee, the rich pay all the income taxes. That is not going to help. The younger generation is really struggling to economically to buy a house, and even in many instances just to buy the necessities of life. Keep in mind that median wages have increased maybe 20% since the 1970s, whereas between 1946 and 1971, they doubled. All right. Or maybe it was 50%. What, 50% after inflation. And that was half the time. So economically, the middle class, especially the median worker, has economically stagnated. And that's why Joe Biden lost. He kept saying, "Oh, the economy's great. You should vote for me. The economy's great. If it's wrong, you don't know what you're talking about." Well, a 25-year-old with $150,000 worth of college debt who can't find a job other than some low-paying job at Dunkin's, or maybe they find a decent job, but it's still not enough to buy a house because housing prices have more than doubled over and above inflation. And of course, now the interest rates are higher too. So what we need to do is say, look, we want to fix this for you. We as libertarians, we believe in markets, and the markets aren't working. The markets are geared to helping the billionaires. Here's one example. If you're a billionaire and you're a real estate developer, what you do is, if you have $1 billion, you buy $5 billion worth of property. You have 20% equity in those $5 billion worth of housing units, and you have $4 billion worth of mortgage debt. You love the mortgage debt because inflation takes away that mortgage debt. 3% inflation is like a $120 million gift every year that it's of mortgage forgiveness. But here's the thing. When they lower the interest rates, the sticker price of the properties go up. So if you bought the properties back in 2000, by 2022, 2023, those properties had doubled in value. So now you're not just a billionaire, you're a $6 billionaire, because those $5 billion worth of property that you bought with the $4 billion worth of mortgages are now worth $10 billion. So you have $6 billion in equity. And then you can recapitalize and remaximize at 20%. And what happens is, when the inflation comes in 2022, 2023, oh, wait, inflation's up to 8%. And guess what? That's almost $2 billion worth of mortgage forgiveness. So, I mean, this is how the system is rigged for the billionaires. And you can go right down the line. Like, it's not just in real estate and finance. It's on Wall Street with and corporations. If the corporation goes bankrupt, the federal government steps in. But if you go bankrupt and you lose your house, so I mean that's how the system needs to be fixed. We need to stop favoring the billionaires.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many people, even in my generation, but I know younger Americans as well, where the only way for them to really make more money is to like get another job, right? So, they have their 9 to 5, and then they're doing 20 hours of Uber or Uber Eats or DoorDash every single week. And that's the money they're trying to put into saving for their house. But because they're doing that, it's impossible to start a family or have any real quality of life. So everybody's absolutely miserable on top of that. And I appreciate you actually being able to share a libertarian message to those people, because if we allow them to be disenfranchised by the Republicans, and we don't present a better alternative, Nick, who is, as you say, I find him very unappealing. I don't think he really has anything interesting to say. But that being said, he does absolutely annihilate people like Piers Morgan and make them look really stupid. And so his ideas seem popular. So it's really important that we're presenting an alternative to Nick Fuentes, because if not, he's just going to gain in popularity by smashing the establishment that is responsible for everybody's horrible living standards now. Tom Edlum, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate your time. I hope you continue to write on these subjects. Again, I think it's so important for libertarians to grapple with these topics. I know you've gotten some pushback on these articles, but they are really important.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Tom.